Hey guys, welcome to Exploration Place on this windy but beautiful day. And today we are actually going to talk about wind and Kansas storms. So why is Kansas so windy? Well, it has a lot to do with our location in the United States. So we have cold, dry air coming off the Rockies into the Central Plains, and then we have the Gulf of Mexico, which has hot and humid air coming up. And when those two mix together, we get a term called convection. So convection is when hot and cold mix together. All right, we can show this by having a cup of cold water that we've dyed blue, pouring it right in here. We're going to fill it almost all the way up to the top. And then some hot water that we've dyed red. Do the same thing. I'm going to fill that one almost all the way up to the top. Now, when we think about hot and cold, we know one of those rises and one of those sinks. Do you remember which one it is? So, hot air is going to rise. So I'm going to take my cold air, the cold water, and I'm going to flip it upside down and pray to the Lord that this does not make a dry mess. There we go. We're going to set it right on top of our hot water. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this card. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think the two will mix together, or do you think they'll stay separate? All right, let's try. Very slow. So we know over time that our hot air is going to rise. And so it's going to mix that cold and that hot together. And if we continue to look at this, it's going to turn our top cup purple. Can you see the smoke or the red water rising? So these are how storms are formed. That hot and that cold air are mixing together, which is what creates a lot of storms and a lot of wind in Kansas. And with that, we also get tornadoes and we get dust storms. There's a lot that goes with it. Let's see if we can make it a little bit more dramatic here. There we go. So as we're doing this, the cold air is sinking, but it's not sinking quite as fast as that hot is rising. But over time, if we were to continue doing this, then both of them would become the same color. All right, good? All right, so what's that term called? Yes, it's convection. Convection is when hot and cold mix together. So I'm gonna gently pour this out. All right, we're gonna set up for our next part. Once we have figured out how storms are made, we wanna talk a little about how those storms affect Kansas. And they do so through a lot of different ways. But one of the ways that isn't talked about that often is a drought. So a drought is a type of weather that we have a lot here in Kansas. And a drought is when there is a time period where we are not getting enough precipitation. And when those droughts happen, we get dry soil. So these cutouts of sponges are going to represent our soil today, and we have a small pile of them. We're going to see what happens when that convection, that is what causes a lot of our wind in Kansas, blows that wind, and see what happens to our soil. So I'm going to use my bellows right here to move our soil across the table. And you can see that it moves it very quickly, and you can even get our soil to go completely off the table. So dry soil is something that affects us year-round. If there's dry soil, it means that we can get dust in the air, which causes more storms, and it's a huge other problem because we get flooding and there's just more to it. But it also causes a lot of issues for our farmers because without healthy soil that has enough moisture in it, we're not able to keep that soil on the ground. So that process is called erosion, when the soil is being moved. And in this case, it's wind erosion. And we want our soil to stay in place. We have that issue not only with farmers, but here in town. If you see the sand or the soil moving where there isn't enough grass or trees to keep it in place. But we can help that. So anytime we water, that helps that fact. But we can also use our soil to soak up our water, and when it gets a good rainstorm, we can soak it up and see what happens with healthy soil. So I'm going to drop a few of these in here so we can get our healthy soil. So we've got our healthy soil now. It's got lots of water in it. I'm going to put these back down on the table. So now that we know that a drought makes our soil dry and it makes erosion a lot easier, do you think that our wet soil is going to be healthier and stay in place, or do you think it's going to move more? All right, so we're going to get our bellows back out. We're going to see what happens with our soil when we attempt to keep it in place. Is it moving? I can't get it to move. And that's good. We don't want our soil to move. We want to lessen the effects of wind erosion so that we keep our soil in place and so that we aren't having any issues with wind erosion in our area. So now that we know that storms are created through convection, the cold coming off the Rockies and the warm coming up off the Gulf of Mexico and mixing in Oklahoma and Kansas areas, we also then can see that storms are good for our community. And even though they can be dangerous, make sure to take shelter when needed, they also do a lot of good for our area, especially since Kansas is an agricultural state. So thanks for joining us today, learning about stormy weather. I hope you guys had so much fun and that you're able to try this at home. You can even do it with just blowing on the sponges or finding some dry paper towels. All right, thank you guys.